Welcome to our 2021 virtual festival. Island life has been very different over the last year. It's been quiet. We've been able to have walks on beaches, enjoy the wildlife and the countryside. But things are starting to open up again. So we're really looking forward to seeing our visitors back at the distillery very soon. In the meantime, on behalf of the Visitor Centre staff, I'd like to invite you to join us for our special festival tour that we've produced just for you. Please sit back and enjoy. Pour yourself a dram. We'll see you soon.
To begin our journey, the barley arrives on the island by boat. From the boat, the barley is then transported into lorries. This is then taken up through Port Ellen to the distillery.
Today we're going to show you how we make our whisky, but before we tour our distillery here, I want to show you something that's really special to me and show you one of our most important ingredients. In fact, it's probably the most important ingredient, the water. So today, before we look at the distillery, we're going to actually head up into these hills and I'm going to show you the water source for Laphroaig. So it's a great sight, seeing the water coming over the dam behind me. Now, we're often asked about the water and do we actually do anything to the water before we use it in the process? Well, the answer is no, we don't. The water that you see coming over this dam is going to be used from here. It's going to go in a pipeline down to Laphroaig. From there it's going to be used in the steeps, in the maltings, in the mash house to make whiskey. So no filtration, no chemicals, no nothing. So how does it taste? Well, we're about to find out. I don't know if you can see this, but I'm looking at a really lovely colour. It's almost whiskey coloured already. And that's a sign that it's flowing across the landscape. It's picking up a lot of mineral content. It's picking up basically everything that the environment gives it. How does it taste? Well, delicious. I'd sooner have this than tap water any day. And in a moment, I'm going to hand you over to Tracy, and she's going to enjoy a dram of our whisky, and we're going to use some of this water in that dram. What could be better than that?
So I'm up at the water source with James. It's a fantastic location up here. We love to share it with our visitors. When they come up and have a tour, we bring a picnic up here. There's a picnic bench just round the corner and we'll sit, group of friends, sharing stories and making memories with people from all over the world, sitting, chatting. It's one of the nicest things about being a tour guide is making friends, and a good way to make friends is to share a whisky. So I've brought up to the water source a cask strength 10-year-old Laphroaig. It's 58.6, so it needs a wee bit of water. I've got the whisky in my glass. And I've got water from James. So we're going to add a drop of this straight from the reservoir. Gorgeous. That's just going to bring out that peatiness, the sweetness. At cask strength, it's probably just a little bit too strong for me without the water, so Slàinte, cheers. water of life. So now we've shared a dram, let's follow the water and head back down to the distillery.
The water flows from the Kilbride Reservoir through the Fèis Ìle Laphroaig field to the distillery.
When raw barley arrives at the distillery, around 7 tonnes is placed in each of the 4 steeps. Steeps perform exactly as their name suggests. It is within them that the barley first meets the fresh, cool water from the Kilbride Reservoir, and the barley will remain within them soaking for around 2 days, during which time the water will be drained and refreshed a total of 3 times. Through this, the barley will uptake the water and swell into a plump grain, similar to making couscous. This kick-starts the grain to begin the germination process.
The steeps are emptied by opening the valve at the bottom. The barley is then emptied from there into the traditional wooden chariot.
Hello everyone and welcome to our malt floors. This is where all of our barley is going to lie after we've had it in our steeps. As you can see, we've got a pretty full floor here of some freshly steeped barley that's just been put down. The barley is going to remain on this floor for just over a week. During that week, we can't leave it alone. If you leave it alone, we're going to end up with a barley field. But what we want is the glorious nutrients in it that are going to be used to make our malt whisky. So in order to get all of those nutrients out, we are going to have to keep turning our barley every few hours. It's a long, painstaking process. Maltmen are very nocturnal for this reason, because if you leave this alone for too long at any point, the roots are going to start growing in this barley tangle together, and that's what's going to give you a nice barley field. So here we have a perfect example of barley that we've left for too long. This is exactly what we're not looking for. Part of turning this barley helps regulate that temperature throughout the process. We're bringing the warmer barley from the bottom up to the top, and the cooler barley from the top is getting mixed round and put to the bottom as well. So throughout this whole painstaking process of a week, these maltmen are working day and night. We never let them go home. They're not allowed to at any point during this process, because if you leave this alone too long, you've ruined the entire process of making whiskey, and you've got to start all over again. The downside of dealing with barley is that you cannot make this go faster. You cannot make this go slower. So for 7 days, this is going to be constantly turned day and night. We're going to have to keep checking our temperature constantly. We like to check the temperature through handy little floor thermometers. They'll just sit in the barley and give the guys a rough idea of what the temperature is going to be. However, if we've managed to get this process right, we're able to move on to our kiln, where our barley is going to be smoked.
After 6 days, the maltman uses a machine to push the barley towards a hole in the floor. This drops the grain to the bottom floor, where it meets the conveyor, which then carries it all the way back up to be deposited in the kiln. The kiln has a metal slatted floor to allow the smoke to penetrate through. The spreader is used to ensure the grain reaches every corner of the kiln and creates a nice even layer about a foot deep.
So what is peat? Well, this is peat right here. This is what it's made of, and it's made up of the grass that you can see, the heather growing out of it. You see the moss growing out of it too. You can see the moss is growing kind of all over the place here, and over the course of thousands of years, it goes through its life cycle. It'll live, die, and start to decompose. But because of the boggy conditions, it only just breaks it only so far. And in a few minutes here, I'm actually going to show you how we extract the peat from here and get it ready for transporting back to the distillery. Alright, so that is how we get the peat out of the ground and get it back to the distillery. Over to you, Amy.
The peat is then transported to us here at the distillery. This is one of our 2 peat fires. Here is where we smoke the barley in the kiln, which is directly above us. We use a cold smoke for 12 hours, which provides a different type of peat flavour. Because the smoke is cold, this means that we do the smoking and drying separately. These 2 separate processes are what makes us unique here at Laphroaig.
The kilns at Laphroaig are done in 2 separate stages. The smoking, for the first 12 hours, the grain is flavoured using cold smoke from the peat fire below. This rises through the floor, through the grain, and up through the traditional square pagoda chimney. The drying is done after the smoking. We have a heat recovery system here at Laphroaig, which gathers the steam from the stillhouse. This is passed through a radiator producing hot air, which is blown up through the floor to dry the grain for 18 hours. After being in the kilns for 30 hours, the grain is now known as peated malt, and this needs to be emptied out the kiln. We call this stripping the kilns. The malt men will come in here, open the trap door in the corner, and the malt is then pushed from here through into the malt deposit bins.
Here at Laphroaig we use a Porteous mill. There's not a lot to see on the outside as it's all enclosed in a red metal case. However, on the inside there are 2 rollers at the top and 2 at the bottom. The malted barley goes through, the top 2 rollers crack the grain open, and the bottom 2 grind it down to a finer, floury substance called grist, which is sent over to the mash house. The next stage in the journey is the mashing. This is where we want to extract all those lovely smoky sweet flavours from the grain into liquid form. To do this, we are going to add 5.5 tonnes of grist into the Lauter tun along with the water from our Kilbride reservoir. The large rake arms inside will mix everything together. We will run 3 waters in total through the grist, the first water being cooler so we don't kill off the sugars and starches. The second 2 are run through much hotter. The run in total takes about 4.25 hours. The first 2 waters, known as wort, will be sent to one of the washbacks, and the third water, being a lot weaker, will be sent to a heating tank and becomes the first water of the next mash. This allows any sugars and flavours to be recycled. The best way of describing this process is it's like making 3 cups of tea with 1 tea bag. Once the wort has been pumped out, all that's left are the spent grains or the draff. The rake arms then turn anti-clockwise, and this will push the draft out through a hole in the floor, out to the big grey tank. Lorries will then come in and take the draft away to use as cattle feed. And at this stage in the journey, we will only have happy cows, not merry cows, as no alcohol is involved. The fermentation happens in the washbacks. Each washback holds approximately 53,000 litres of wort, to which we add about 180 litres of liquid yeast. The yeast will initially eat up the oxygen in the wort and reproduce itself. Once all oxygen is depleted, it will move into the anaerobic phase, eating up the sugar in the liquid and producing three things: an increase in temperature, carbon dioxide, and most importantly, alcohol. After a fermentation of around 55 hours, the wort, now referred to as wash, will be about 8% ABV, similar to a beer but without the hops. The wash will now be sent to the large tank in the boiler house before being transferred to the still house and preheated. In the mash house we have 6 stainless steel washbacks, which were changed over from Oregon pine in the early 80s purely for hygiene reasons. What they used to do many years ago to clean the old wooden washback, they would send a man down with a rope tied around his waist, and he would have to clean the washback with a big brush. Now it's a lot more straightforward. All we do is blast with steam in between each run. Here we have our magnificent 7. There are 3 wash stills and 4 spirit stills. Number 1 spirit still is double the size of the others and provides different flavours from the other 3, which means that the distillation has to be balanced at all times to provide a consistent spirit. We have steeply ascending line arms, which is also unusual within the industry. This creates more reflux and therefore produces a lighter new make spirit. We also have the longest 4-shot run in the industry at 45 minutes. We have a double distillation. The 8% wash fills up the wash still, which is heated using oil and steam. This boils the liquid just like a big kettle. The vapours rise up over the line arm, hit the condensers, and your first distillation comes off at 25% and sent to the low wines tank. Everything in the tank is then sent for the second distillation to the spirit stills. The liquid is boiled up, but this time the condensed vapours are collected in 3 different parts. Your first part, which is the 4-shot, is run through for 45 minutes and then returned to the low wines tank. 4-shot is too high in alcohol and does not have the flavours needed to be spirit. 4-shot is run until the ABV from around 75% down to 70%. The second part to come off is the spirit, or the heart of the run, and comes off from 70 down to 60%. This liquid has the strength and flavour to make it to the maturation stage. This part will be sent to the spirit receiver tank. The average strength in the spirit tank is 68%. The third part to come off is the faints and comes off from 60 down to 1%. This will be returned to the low wines tank as it's too weak to use. The stills run until the liquid running off is 1% ABV. The byproduct of the wash stills is called pot ale and the spirit stills is spent lees. These are mixed together and pumped out into the bay where the Islay shellfish, in particular scallops, feast on the goodness. We also have some very happy swans in the bay.
Before spirit can be placed in the casks, the alcohol content is measured and, using our own water, reduced to the 63.5% required for casking. Casks are filled to the brim and sealed with a wooden bung. Then rolled off to rest in a warehouse on site for their big sleep. We have 2 types of warehouse here at Laphroaig. This is our modern rack warehouse. These are large empty buildings with metal shelving called racks. They hold casks stacked up to 11 high. These warehouses fluctuate in temperature. In warm weather they heat up and there can be differences in temperature even between the lower racks and the rows near the roof space. This drives the liquid in and out of the wood. We have several traditional dunnage warehouses on site. They have thick stone walls, no windows, and have 3 floors within. The casks are stored 3 high on wooden poles. This structure is known as a stow. The temperature in a dunnage warehouse remains fairly constant with only slight seasonal fluctuations. The liquid moves gently in and out of the wood in this type of warehouse.
The majority of the cask that we use here at Laphroaig is the ex-bourbon cask. It's a 200 litre cask and it's made from American oak coming from Kentucky.
Our perfect example of the bourbon cask here is our 10-year-old.
A quarter cask is a bourbon cask that's been broken down to 125 litres. In doing this, we have a 33% more contact with wood, which means a faster maturation.
Quarter cask here is one of our most popular expressions here at the distillery.
And finally, we have the sherry cask. We get these sherry casks from Spain, made from a European oak. They can vary in size from 250 litres up to 500. There's so many different variations of sherry, though what we like to use the most is Oloroso.
This is our triple wood expression and it's matured in all the casks that we've talked about today.